There's much in that new video that I want to talk about. But number one, for today, as we focus on this offensive in and around the hospital, from any of your Doctors Without Borders team, are you hearing any new detail today about Al-Shifa?
Yeah, like you said, the communications has been really difficult. So what we're getting are sort of scraps and bits of information. And, over the last few days, really since Friday, there's just been this major shift in the tone and the messaging that's coming from my colleagues out of Al-Shifa. Up until Friday, really, my colleagues, my doctors and nurse colleagues, not only in Al-Shifa, but in the other hospitals that were still sort of barely functional, they were doing all they could to provide medical care. And the shift over the last few days has just been towards one of survival. They've just gone into pure survival mode. That's because the hospital came under intense bombardment as of Friday. It has been impossible to evacuate. My colleagues have repeatedly sent messages along the lines of, we are being killed, please help us, please allow an evacuation. It hasn't been possible from what they've told us to actually evacuate. One doctor colleague was describing how some people had tried to leave the hospital and came under fire, under bombardment and under sniper fire, so it has not been possible to leave.
So Briar Stewart, or a little bit earlier in our newscast, she had been talking, she was able to connect with one of your MSF, Médecins, Sans Frontières doctors, who was sheltering in place in a surgical wing. And just to bring some of the detail that she got from him, yes, there were bombs and gunshots. He didn't know the situation, but understood that the military was in the basement, and he also didn't go near the window for fear of being shot. So that sort of corroborates what you're hearing.
Which is exactly, so as of yesterday and this morning, again, just sort of scraps of information that we're receiving from colleagues. They're hunkering down inside of rooms inside the hospital where they feel a little bit safer. They're hearing gunfire. As you said, they're careful not to go near the windows or to show up too prominently for fear of coming under direct attack.
I was going to ask about evacuation. I don't know if we're able to go back and play that new video again of the babies being moved. So much focus on the neonatal unit and those 36 babies who needed to be in an incubator but weren't. But it looks like, I mean, is there anything encouraging as you watch the babies at least being moved? I mean, this is video that's come out from the Gaza Health Ministry itself.
Well, first of all, to take a step back, when on Friday, Saturday, when we completely lost power in Al-Shifa, that meant that some of the vital functions of the hospital, including incubators for babies, dialysis machines, emergency room lighting, these sorts of, completely obliterated then. And so my colleagues have indeed confirmed that we've lost a few babies at last count.
That new number 6, that was just today.
Yeah, indeed. Yesterday it was 3, so apparently now up that much more. So, yeah, it has become. I don't know if I would use the word encouraging. Of course, every life at this time that we're able to save and able to bring to safety is a good thing. But certainly, what we've seen, just zooming out and just looking at the pattern over the last weeks, is you've got this incredibly heavy-handed, systematic attacks on hospital facilities. And we've gone from a situation where, some hospitals are continuing to do some form of medical care to a complete failure of the health system now. So on the one hand, you've got the right hand obliterating a health system, and now you've got maybe a little bit of help and hope to bring little bits of fuel, maybe a few incubators or something to help. And it seems really off to obliterate a entire health system like that and then look for these tiny bits of hope.
Let us do that just for one more moment. You mentioned the fuel, and for the first time, the UN is getting some fuel in today through that Rafah border crossing, but it is just for the United Nations, so that's not going to reach you. Is that right? Any of the people in Doctors Without Borders who might need fuel for your aid and assistance? It's not for you for now.
And when I speak about the failure of the health system, we're talking northern Gaza. Now we have a complete failure, and there have been a few trucks coming into at that Rafah border crossing. None of the medical supplies, the desperately needed medical supplies. I mean, we're talking about the most basic gauze, painkillers, utensils for doing surgical interventions. The most basic kinds of things have not reached the north at all. We, Doctors Without Borders, have, just as of yesterday, we're able also to get a small team across the border at Rafah 15 people, surgeons, anesthetists, intensive care specialists. That's a hopeful sign. A few supplies coming across too, but so far all of that is going to be concentrated in the south as the attacks continue in the north. Also, why we're calling for this ceasefire. I'm sure you've seen that open letter. On behalf of MSF, I've written to Justin Trudeau really to appeal for a total and complete ceasefire. It's unusual. We normally do not step out and call for parties to conflict to just put down their weapons and stop fighting. We normally would call for respect for these medical spaces, respect for humanity in the midst of war.
So those long, sustained humanitarian pauses that they seem to endorse, you're going beyond that this time.
Well, we're going beyond because a pause just implies that you're going to resume. And if you're going to resume in any manner consistent with what has been the case so far, complete disregard for civilian life, that's unacceptable. That's why we're calling for ceasefire.
That's the word that the head of the WHO has just used. Dr. Tedros is holding a briefing even as we're speaking today, Joseph, and he talked about the offensive into Al-Shifa in Gaza. Totally unacceptable was the quote that he used. I just want to, again, what we're hearing on the other side, and it's been very open from Israel's military spokesperson, using the phrases targeted and precise operation, that they gave forewarning to those in the hospital to leave. And again, because of the Hamas command center, which they believe is underneath the hospital, operating beneath the hospital, and they say they have found evidence of that. Listening to that as you look at the situation, does that provide any justification or clarification for these actions? Yeah,
first off, targeted and precise is absolutely not the experience of my colleagues and of the patients that we're treating. And again, I go back to October 7th and to the beginning of this, where the pattern of indiscriminate bombings, I believe the WHO has now counted, as of 3 days ago, 137 separate attacks on healthcare facilities. And then combined with the siege warfare, in which there's the denial of the basic items necessary for survival, food, water, medicines, and so on. So I can't square that this is precise and it is targeted with what our teams are experiencing. And then you mentioned Hamas and the use of these facilities. My colleagues are learning in real time what we are also hearing about the potential of stockpiles of weapons and that sort of thing. To the extent that Hamas may have been using these facilities, that would also constitute a crime under the laws of war, under international humanitarian law. That does not justify the type of response, the disproportional wiping out of entire medical facilities in response to that. There are still obligations, regardless of what that may look like, there are still obligations to protect civilians, protect medical spaces, allow evacuations. And in this case, they must be taking measures to continue medical services. And we're seeing none of that. Our teams are cowed in corners trying to stay alive and protecting patients as best they can. This is so far from respect for humanitarian law.